Ripple effects. The line between respect and humiliation is often no thicker than the laminate of a VIP pass. Justice Malcolm B. Carter stood motionless in the terminal, his access badge dangling loosely from his hand, its shiny surface catching fluorescent light. Across from him, the airline agenta woman with pinched features and a taut ponytail scrutinized the card like she was looking for counterfeit currency. Her eyes flickered up to Carter's face, then back down again, suspicion tightening her lips. Behind him, the line of passengers waiting to check in had grown to nearly 24, and the collective weight of their impatience hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Malcolm, a senior federal judge who had sat on the bench longer than some of these travelers had been alive, had cultivated patience into an art form. But the tone the agent used, a tone of dismissal, of polite but hollow authority scraped against something deep within him. He'd heard it before, too many times. "Sir," she said, voice louder now, meant to carry, "I'm going to need some additional identification. This pass doesn't appear to be legitimate." Malcolm had already handed her his government-issued ID, along with the printed itinerary and the conference invitation listing him as the keynote speaker. Yet somehow, that wasn't enough. He didn't want to escalate, didn't want to reach for his phone, didn't want to call in favors he'd spent a career avoiding. But the moment was crystallizing into one of those rare instances where dignity demanded response. As her words echoed down the terminal, drawing glances from the bored and curious alike, Malcolm's hand moved with deliberate precision toward his phone. A tap, then another. The number was already in his favorites. He didn't want to make the call. But sometimes, justice meant standing up for yourself before you could speak for anyone else. Less than 3 minutes later, the agent's posture stiffened as the phone passed from Malcolm's hand to hers. Her face paled as the voice on the other end introduced himself as the Chief Justice of the circuit and demanded an explanation. She stammered out fragmented answers, eyes flickering toward Malcolm with something between regret and fear. Within moments, her shift supervisor approached, pale and breathless. "Sir," the supervisor said, "Judge Carter, I deeply apologize. There's been a misunderstanding. We'll get you cleared immediately." Then to the agent, "Karen, please step aside. HR will be speaking with you." That's how a laminated card had triggered a chain reaction. But it wasn't the beginning of the story. 12 hours earlier, Judge Malcolm B. Carter had woken up in his Washington, D.C. brownstone to soft light slipping through the blinds. At 66, he still rose before the alarm. Old habits died hard. His late wife had often joked that he lived like a military officer on judicial time. He sat on the edge of his bed, letting the stiffness in his spine subside before reaching for the framed photograph on his nightstand. The picture was from their 40th anniversary. Evelyn's laugh was frozen in time, head tilted back, a glass of champagne in her hand. She had passed 8 months earlier, but every morning, he greeted her the same way. "Big day, Evie. Madison Conference. You always said they'd want to hear what I had to say." He moved through his morning with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who had already won life's most important trials, the civil rights fights of the 80s, the crack epidemic sentencing reform of the early 2000s, the bruising confirmation hearings. Today, he would deliver the keynote speech titled, "Equity in an Unequal System, Reflections from the Bench." He dressed carefully in a charcoal suit Evelyn had once called "your battle armor," fastening his grandfather's cufflink shearlooms of a man born a sharecropper who died seeing his grandson appointed to the federal bench. Over breakfast, his daughter Serena called to remind him not to forget his heart medication or extra shirts. She was a pediatric surgeon, all sharpness and care, living proof that resilience was hereditary. "You nervous?" she asked. "I've sentenced murderers and lectured senators. Speaking to a ballroom of judges doesn't scare me." But it did. A little. Because they knew what he knew. Because they could judge the judge. On the way to the airport, his rideshare driver, a pre-law student named Jamal, recognized him from a podcast interview and launched into questions about law school. "There aren't many black judges where I'm from," Jamal said. "There aren't many anywhere," Malcolm replied. "But maybe you'll help fix that." He gave Jamal his card and told him to reach out. At the airport, after clearing security, Malcolm gave up his seat on the flight to a crying college student desperate to reach her father's hospital bed. She had no idea who he was. He didn't tell her. just handed over his boarding pass and wished her well. That's how he ended up rebooking his flight for the next day and staying overnight at the airport hotel. That's also how he encountered the same gate agent Karen Winters at the judicial conference, where she had been reassigned temporarily as part of the venue's credentialing staff. She didn't recognize him, or pretended not to. At the conference check-in, Malcolm's name was missing from the VIP list. He was handed a standard badge and told to verify his identity again. He patiently explained, politely insisted, showed his ID, conference email, business card. None of it sufficed. Karen leaned over the desk and said, "I need to verify you're who you say you are." A lot of people try to sneak into these areas, especially without usual credentials. Usual. That word rang loud in Malcolm's ears. With slow precision, he made another call. This time, to Chief Justice Daniel Browning, the man chairing the entire event. "What the hell?" Browning barked on the phone. "You're the keynote. Hold on. Let me talk to whoever this is." Karen took the phone, face turning gray as Browning's voice thundered through the receiver. A few minutes later, she was dismissed from the credential desk and escorted out by security. Her replacement issued Malcolm's pass with apologies. Later that afternoon, Judge Carter took the stage to deliver his speech. He changed nothing and changed everything. He told the crowd hundreds of judges, attorneys, law clerks exactly what had happened that day, that morning, that year. He weaved his lived experience into the statistics and citations he'd prepared, speaking not just as a judge, but as a man who had spent his life wearing the burden of double standards like a second robe. "The question is not whether bias exists in our system," he said. "The question is what we choose to do when it stares us in the face." The crowd gave him a 3-minute standing ovation. The next morning, a committee was formed, the Equity and Access Initiative. Malcolm was asked to chair it. He said yes, on one condition: we don't just fire the Karens. We educate them. We give them a path to change. Karen Winters, offered the opportunity to attend a 12-week racial bias and justice awareness program, completed it. 3 months later, she returned not to reclaim her old job, but to interview for a new one, public liaison officer in the Federal Circuit's Accessibility Division. "Why should I approve this?" Malcolm asked her during their final meeting. "Because I learned," she said quietly. "And because I want to be the reason someone like you doesn't have to prove themselves again." He approved the hire. A year later, at the next judicial conference, Karen introduced Judge Carter with grace and professionalism. After his closing speech, she stood quietly beside him as reporters snapped photos and a new class of judges, law students, and Jamals from across the country lined up to shake his hand. That's what justice looks like sometimes. Not a gavel slamming down, not a verdict read aloud, but a laminated pass, a rebooked flight, a missed first impression, a second chance, and the ripple effects they carry forward.